Hello, I'm Steve Bomar, a certified professional photographer with the PPA. My website is stevebomar.com. I love photography because each image tells a story about the photographer and the subject. What you photograph tells me a little bit about who you are. Do you love old trucks, broken windows, flowers, animals, insects, or landscapes? If you go back and look at your images, you will see a pattern, and that pattern describes how you see the world. As your judge this month, I am looking for the technical characteristics in an image for quality. Lighting is very important, and use of composition. How do I feel when I see your images is a big factor in judging. I'm looking at what is really special about your image. Does your image grab my attention? Does your image jump off my computer screen and grab me by the eyes and say, hey, look at me, or does it say, I just threw something in this month? Remember, you are competing against your friends. Congratulate the winners and walk away with new ideas and possibilities for next month. Thank you. Flower teardrops. Score is 7 points. This image is a flower image. The background is a nice soft part of the image. It's also darker, which helps bring out the flower part of the image. It's also got a lot of water drops on it. And the difficulty with this image is the depth of field is so shallow. The information in the flower that's in focus are just a couple of water drops and just a little bit of space in there. So that really draws back the image and sort of inhibits its ability to score at a higher level. The exposure is okay on the petals. It's a little bit bright on the edge of the petal, but it's really all about the focus on this image. An excited baby bird. This is really a humorous shot of this bird. He's got crazy wild hair. He's got all sorts of funny things happening in his expression in his face. I also like the vertical crop on it. However, the bird's beak is way out of focus and the background is sort of distracting with the white branch in the background. It sort of competes with the baby bird in the front. Overall, it's a basic image of a excited baby bird. Texas wildflowers, 9 points. This image is a typical bluebonnet photo that I've seen many times. The challenge with bluebonnets is the depth of field and getting more of the flower in focus. And actually, the little bluebonnet petals are sort of not very attractive because they sort of always look a little bit eaten up. For me, it's always better to get a field of bluebonnets and capture that instead of the close-up of a bluebonnet. In this particular image, the background has a nice soft focus in it, which helps bring out the bluebonnet, and the red petals help the image. If you could have toned down the background a little bit in exposure, that would have made the bluebonnet in the foreground pop out further. A visitor, 11 points. The flower picture in here, the center of the flower picture is really where the interesting part of the flower is. The outer edge of the flower is not as interesting as the inside part. You have the yellow circles of the circling the inside, and you have those little things on the inside of the flower, which is really interesting. The butterfly is an added component, and he is in focus. Although he doesn't really match the flower, it doesn't sort of complement the flower. He's sort of looking out the wrong direction, and he's a cute little guy, but he doesn't really add to the image. The Lock, 12 points, honorable mention by Katrina Christopher. This image is very compelling for me because of the way the background is totally out of focus. It brings the light through the fence and through the gate itself. And then you have the lock going around the gate. And in some ways it sort of creates the sense of a cross and how we're set free from the chains of life through the cross. So it sort of tells that story for me. Maybe because we just went through Easter. But that's really why I liked the image. I would have liked it to be a little bit warmer in color. It's apparently taken in a cloudy day. Based on the blue coloring in the image, a warmer color would actually bring out more texture and warmth in the image. Red Lily, 12 points, honorable mention by Denny Farmer. This image is really nice and sharp. It's got a lot of nice color in it. And the lily flower, the background is subdued and sort of out of focus and darker, so it helps bring out the lily itself. The only thing I don't particularly care for the image is the actually flash strobe look in the lighting on the flower itself, because it makes the lighting overall flat. But it does have a nice diagonal line going through there made by the petals. The Dance by Todd Williams, 3rd place, 13 points. This is a fun, playful image with these little flower things. They sort of remind me of my 3 granddaughters. They're all redheaded, and their hair sort of always looks like that, sort of going everywhere. The coloring and the lighting in the image really brings out the texture in the flower, and it's a lot of fun. It is playful. The only thing that is distracting maybe is the sort of leathery-looking background. Other than that, I really like that image. I like the circular shape that the flowers make together. There's also 3 of them together. It all sort of comes together compositionally. Second place, Jeffrey Schurenbrock, 13 points, and this image is titled High Up. This is sort of cool looking artistically. It really follows that rule of thirds where the building is on the left sort of third line there, the vertical line. It also reflects all the clouds in the building itself, and then the clouds are blurred either because of a time elapse of the exposure allowing the clouds to move through it. Although you don't see that in the reflection of the building. The clouds in the building look like they're not moving. So he may have created that motion and then added it later. But I like the color combination and the whole overall artistic graphic look of this image. Morning Visit by Nok Wong, 14 points. First place. This is a really nice capture. The background is really kept under control. It's really soft. It doesn't have any distraction or competition with the foreground, which is the subject of the tulip and the bug on it. The placement of the tulip follows the rule of thirds. It's on the third line, the left vertical third line. Also, the bug is sort of on the right. If you look at the tulip itself and divide it into threes, the bug itself is like on a third vertical line, actually on the tulip itself. But I love the coloring in the flower. I love the pinks that are coming out in the tulip. This is a really beautiful capture. The only thing I might have done differently is actually bring up the exposure level because it's a little bit too dark, and if it's a little bit lighter it might actually pop further out in the image and be more interesting if you had done that. And then you might have had to also bring down the highlights on the top rim of the flower if you did that as well. Dust on Fangirl, 7 points. One of the challenges of this image is interest. It does do some interesting things with the rule of thirds and drawing third lines through the image, both vertically and horizontally. So it does have that. It does have decent lighting, which actually brings out the texture in the actual dust itself on each of those little pieces of the fan grill. I don't think that's a spider web, but I guess it could be. If it was, it would be nice if there was a spider there. Water as Clear as Ice, 7 points. This image reminded me of the movie The Blob back from, I guess, the 60s or 70s. I think I see a couple of eyes in the ice here. I was always trying to figure out where the water was going and where it was falling from, and it looks like I'm looking straight down a waterfall, but I'm not really sure what I'm seeing. It's interesting. It's an interesting idea, and there's a lot of sharpness and detail in the ice itself, which makes this a very nice image. What it lacks, though, is exposure. It's just too dark to really pop off my screen and capture me completely. Distracted Driver, 9 points. Now this image does have a story to tell about smoking and the impact of smoking in a person's life. It has a story there that's really compelling. That's looking at the nicotine on the back of each cigarette when they've breathed it into their own lungs, and looking how that color has been attached to the top of the ashtray in this, probably a pickup. I'm thinking pickup. That is really what this image is all about, is that story. Beyond that, compositionally, your subject is sort of centered. It does create sort of a diagonal line. There's that there. I think I'm going to stop at that. That's what is really about this image for me, is the story. A Bee in Your Bluebonnet, 10 points. This is sort of an interesting image. The two bees seem to be really great focus and really sharp, and there's parts of the bluebonnet that are sharp and in focus. But the middle part where the yellow is totally out of focus, which is distracting. And then the background is really competitive with the foreground. So you would have to make it a little bit softer background and then also darken the background so that the bee part can come out, and that yellow part in the center would have to be sharp or toned down a little bit so that the bees can actually be easily seen. And maybe a different crop would do that. Psychedelic Pistol, 10 points. This is actually a decent capture of this flower, and the combination of the yellow and the orange and the blue and the white all seem to go together really well, and it's sort of leaning to one side, which creates some energy there. It's not just straight up and down. So overall, I think that the image does a decent job of composition and color and feeling like that. And what I really saw it the first time, I was thinking jellyfish, because if you go look at some of the sea aquarium worlds, they have those jellyfishes in there, and they sort of look like that. But it's a great capture. I really don't have anything negative to say about it. There's a lot of positive things there, but nothing really negative. Stockdale, 10 points. This is a portrait of a statue, and the lighting on it is well done. That's usually set up by the museum or the place where they have the statue displayed. I like the angle, the profile of the image. I personally prefer things looking at me, so looking at off to one side doesn't really capture my attention as much as if it's looking right at me. In the background, there are some distracting elements. That vertical bar on the left and the window that's back there, it seems to intersect right where his eyeball is on the guy's right eyeball, so that's sort of a distracting element. And then the sort of spiderweb looking thing that's on his lower lip and the chin. I think one of the challenges of photographing a statue is that you're photographing someone else's art, and the competition tends to be a restrictor for higher scores. What time is it? 10 points. Well, apparently it is either 10 minutes before 8 or 10 minutes after 8. That seems to be what the time is. I like the idea of the three things here together, the anti-clock parts and pieces, and that is really cool. I really enjoying this as a macro type shot. The challenge with this image is the overall contrast and the brightness in the image. That part really made the image score a lot lower. Other than that, I think the composition is okay. I might have moved the right clock watch up a little bit higher to sort of create more of a diagonal line between the two lower clocks. It's a great capture, it just needs more contrast and more brightness, more pop, as they would say. Yummy flower, 10 points. This has a nice composition. The circular shape of the flowers that go through the image are great. And the bee sort of attaches right there on that rule of third line where the intersection is at. He's sort of in the middle of the picture, but he also is attaching to the flower sort of a little bit to the right. He's also on the top third line, the horizontal line, which is really good for the composition. The wings on his back really create that line there, that coming across the image like that. Everything isn't sharp and in focus. The challenge that this image has is probably the crop that you had to do to get in close like that to show the bee, because it's taken in the daylight, so you shouldn't have to have a high ISO. So I'm thinking it has to do with the crop. But overall, the image is a nice capture, but the technical aspect of the noise was really an impact to the score on this image. Musical reflection, 11 points. Now, I was looking for the photographer in this picture for a long time. I didn't actually see you, so you're hiding in there somewhere. This is a cool idea and a fun capture of the reflection of the guy inside this instrument that he's playing. You can actually sort of see his feet down there on the ground in front of it. The one thing that I might change a little bit is darken the sky a little bit, because it's a little sort of blown out, and there's some lines or scratches or something on the actual instrument itself that you could have photoshopped out and sort of use your cloning tool and got rid of all those things to make it a little bit less dirty on the actual instrument. But fun capture. A Flower's Best Friend, honorable mention, 12 points by Alan Daniel. The composition in this photograph is very nice. The tips of the petals on the left-hand side make a circular arc through the image. He's nice and sharp and in focus, and I'm just wondering how his eyes really work. Doesn't make sense to me. But the overall quality of the image is very good. I might have tried to create a little bit more contrast in the image to try to create more pop. Overall, it looks a little bit dull to me. I think increasing contrast might have helped. Busy Bee, 12 points, honorable mention by Danielle Daly. This is a nice capture of this bee. I mean, he's big, and he's right in there in the middle of that flower. He's coming in from the left side, going into the image, which sort of his body shape creates an entry point into the photograph. The white sort of entry in the lower left-hand corner, that sort of white purplish looking color back there, it actually helps you bring your eye to that bee. And the circle and the petals in the flower actually keep you all centered in there, checking out that bee to see what he's up to and what he's doing. The only thing I might have done is also tone down the background a little bit. It's a little bit bright, so those bright lights on the left-hand side can be distracting. Nice capture. Mending His Nets, 13 points, third place by Leslie Johnston. I like this image because of the story it tells. The hands are working. There's someone really involved with their work. It's detailed work. He's patching his nets. And this is a nice exposure for the skin color. It all sort of works together well. The compositional lines of the hand leading from the left to the right to that orange thing in the middle where he's mending the net. And then the hand on the other side stops your eye. So you just stay right there in the middle looking at what he or she is doing, mending that net. This is a great capture. It really said a lot to me. Contest Liz won. Second place, 13 points by Vincent Carroll. Well, being from Fort Worth, Texas, you gotta love horned frogs. I like how sharp this image is, how sharp the horned toad is, how you can see his eyes, and everything is perfect in that area. The exposure is wonderful. I mean, you can tell it was taken with a flash or something like that. The only thing I would have done is toned down the bright rocks in the background on the left-hand side so that there's less competition with the horned frog. That's a nice capture. Honestly, I'm not that old. Jack Hung, 14 points, first place. I'd never seen this animal before. I have no idea what it was. It's a nice capture. It's really compelling. The eyes are compelling. The red coloring around his face, the whiskers, the overall image is a wonderful portrait of this animal. The one thing I might have done was warm up the image a little bit and then tone down the brightness in the hair above his face, because that would help you draw even closer and into the eyes of this little creature with a funny little mustache. Sock sticker, 8 points. There's not a lot in there that's in focus. There's a few spots and pieces that are in focus. Nothing to lead me to anything or to say this is what I want you to look at, other than there's a sticker that you got out of your sock, and I think I've had that same sticker in my sock. Yellow carnation and white baby's breath, 9 points. This is a decent capture of this carnation. It's a wonderful place to be. The challenge with this image is the competition between everything. Everything is competing. The background, it's bright and it's coming through the plant. That's competing with your foreground. It's really hard to see the carnation and really appreciate it, along with the baby's breath itself. If there was some way to go for a different angle so that you don't see the actual background of the sky, or if you could put a tin over it or something to make the competition between the background and the foreground not compete. That's really the challenge for this image. It's a little flat in the lighting too. I mean, a little more contrast, a little more pop would help the flower. Great grater, 10 points. This has a nice diagonal lines going through it with the actual grater itself. The thing that bothers me about the image is there's actually cheese on it, which tells me exactly what it is instead of making me guess what it is. I would have preferred it without cheese, and then a little bit more contrast and pop would have made the image come out even further. Maybe you could have done some different coloring and lighting in there to make those little spots that are part of the grater shine through and have some other colors come out of it. That could have been really interesting and very abstract and very graphically designed. The thing that bothered me the most was the cheese. Cherry flower, 10 points. This has a nice pink color to it. The background is not competing from a standpoint of design and texture, except for that one little brown thing on the left-hand side that's going vertical between the petals. That's sort of competitive. But it sort of goes away, and the anti-vignette sort of effect where it's brighter on the edges instead of darker, it draws my eye away from the centerpiece of the flower. I really like the flower photograph in the center, the pink colors, the texture that's in there, the sharpness of those little things that are in there. That's all really nicely done. It's just that the outside border is distracting from the center. Butterfly antenna, 11 points. The composition of this image is very nice. You have the flower creating a diagonal line across the image, and you have a matching diagonal line in the actual butterfly. The detail and sharpness in the stem that goes up to the back of the flower is very nice. It's nicely lit. The center of the flower, nice and sharp and focused, and the legs of the butterfly are very nice. The challenge is that the outer edge of the flower is in the foreground. It's out of focus, and it's sort of in the way of me being able to see the center of the flower. So maybe a little bit different angle would let me be able to see the center of the flower a little bit more. And the fact that the butterfly's wings are totally out of focus, that depth of field in this image is really a distracting component. Might have taken that little spot out on the right hand side next to the petal so that you don't have that spot there. But other than that, the image is a decent capture of the butterfly and the flower. Green is my color, 11 points. The great thing about this image is the composition of the snake itself curling around, making the nice circular shapes, and him actually resting his head in the middle of their own body, which makes me think maybe the title should be Sometimes I Choke Myself Up. Could have been funny. The eyes are in focus, the face is in focus, the image is right there. The thing that I find distracting are the outer edges where it's really bright. It takes me away to the outer edges. You could have also maybe warmed it up just a little bit to make the image a little bit more compelling. Church at Frankfort Preserve. Now, part of this image is actually close up, part of it's not. I guess it qualifies. I like the way the foreground is in the image. It tells a story about the church and what happens around the seasons of this church. And the church in the background has a nice exposure on it. It's not blown out on the sunny side, and it's not too dark in the shadow side of this building. And then you have a decent sky up there that really makes a person feel at home. The one thing that you might think about is where would you actually place the horizon? It's sort of in the center of the image, and push the viewer's eye down more towards the flowers. But it was a nice image. Close Pin-Up, 13 points, honorable mention by Jim Spencer. This is a fun photograph. The line that comes through the image with the rope, it sort of brings you into the photograph. Each one of the clothespins actually stops you, and the fact that one of the clothespins is not exactly straight makes you stay there in the center and actually look at it and explore it. The exposure of the light that's coming across it creates texture in the actual wood, which adds interest to your photograph. I might have done a little bit more of a sepia tone with it to make it look a little bit older looking, but it's a nice capture. Hidden in the Garden by Walter Brock, 13 points, honorable mention. This is a news capture. It sort of captures actually what you saw. It's more of a photojournalist type shot of what's happening in your garden. And in this case, the background is supposed to be sort of distracting. It's sort of supposed to show you how this spider can hide out in your garden. And compositionally, you have the nice branch coming up from the left-hand side, going all the way up through the picture, and then you can see the spider's legs attached to it, and that brings you into the spider. Some things you could have done is brought down some of the highlight, be a little bit less distracting, and get all your exposure right, but that was some of the things that I would work on. Passion Flower, third place, 14 points by Aaron Lesher. This is a very interesting photograph because of the design of the plant itself. All those little lines create an interest in the image. Everything is really sharp in the image, and it helps tell the story. In this particular case, the background helps tell the story. It gives it a place for these little flower things to be and to exist. And it does a really good job at doing all of those things. It all sort of comes together and is really interesting. The only thing I would have scored it higher if it wasn't so dark. It robs it of some of the pop that it could have. Purple Bearded Iris, Nancy Mack, second place, 15 points. I really liked this image, and you got those really nice lines coming out of the image, that circular lines that go into the purple. The overall flow of the image is really artistic. It makes it look beautiful. It gives it a different design than you actually see with your eye. And then in the background, you have that little thing in the background. It has a little yellow on it and a little white back there. Love this image. This is a Cecil or something, some sort of bird. I don't know what the bird is. 15 points, first place. Ming Yang is the photographer. I want to say this is an excellent capture of this little bird, and the detail that's in the feathers and the lighting is just wonderful. You can see his little feet hanging onto that little branch, and then the background is really enhancing the bird. It helps you see the bird even better. It's not competitive. It creates the rule of third lines in the background itself, so that you can sort of divide the background up into thirds horizontally, and then your bird is on the left third vertical line, which at the intersection point, which is really wonderful. The composition is great, and then the colors in the background is complementary to the bird itself. I might have cropped off a little bit of the top because there is a lot of space up there where there's nothing really happening except the green color. Nice capture. Do I Know You? 8 points. This image is a little bit scary. However, the eyes are in focus, the mouth is in focus, the hair around his face is really in focus. Those are great things for the image. Some detractors for the image is the leaf right in front of his eye. That's really distracting, and over the top of his head. Also, the white sort of blown out plant on the left-hand side is distracting. However, it does in a way create a leading line up to the head from the left side of the image. If you just follow the white line all the way through, it sort of brings you up to his face. The plant in the front is sort of distracting, and his hands are not in focus. I think I would have preferred to see the little guy's hands in focus. The one thing that really bothered me about this image more than any of it was the actual stroke around the image. It doesn't seem to make sense to me. It's also a little bit larger than it should be. A stroke around an image, it should be used to frame it and enhance the image and not draw your eye away from the subject. Busy Bees, 8 points. Graphically, you do have the circular shape of the top of the cup, and then you have the intersection with the lemon and the cherry on top. It makes sort of a picturesque composition. And then you have the three Bs on top of there. And you've done something with the background which makes the top B look a little fake. And then the cherry on top is just, there's no detail in it. There's no sharpness in it. It's just sort of a red blob. And then the salt in the foreground is a little bit soft in focus and things like that. I hope you got to drink some of that drink. Docked, 8 points. I really like the subject matter, which are the ropes on the dock. If you look at just that part of the image, I think the image is really good. You have a lot of nice texture in there. You have a nice direction of lighting coming in and creating the texture on the ropes. And there's the rust part in the base. All those things are working really well together. What is not working is the background, and it doesn't really help support the ropes. It sort of tells the story of that we are at a dock, but it's blown out. The tonal range competes with the front with the ropes so that you don't really have the ropes popping out and grabbing my attention. So it's a competing factor for the background. If I were me, I would just sort of crop, and all I would see is the ropes with no sky whatsoever, and increase the contrast a little bit in the ropes to create more texture. Fisherman's Ropes, 8 points. This is a nice graphical design. It's got the circular shape in there. It has the ropes coming out and tying it all together. And you have these sort of hole where you get sort of led down into the middle of the ropes. The problem for this image for me is the actual color tone. I mean, the blue and the sort of red and all those things, that blue color cast just doesn't work for me. When I look at ropes, I like to see a lot more texture. I also like to see a warmer color and not a blue color like this. Fishermen and the story of fishermen they're rugged guys. It's a rugged job, and the tonal range here doesn't bring out that ruggedness, nor does the shape of the rope. The rope's in really good shape. Here's Looking at You, Kid, 9 points. This is another animal capture that is more of a documentary type shot. The animal is in great focus and sharpness. The little hair around his eyes are really sharp, really works with this image. And the background itself is out of focus, and it's a little bit muted so that the bird is more predominant. So I might have muted a little bit more to make it a little bit darker in the background. But the overall sharpness of the image from the tip of his beak all the way up to his eyes is in great sharpness. The lighting, it's a broad lighting on this particular bird, and which makes it a little bit less interesting. And the bird itself is a little scary looking. Poppy, 9 points. The exposure in this image is really nice. The color is really there. It's really bright. It really comes off the image. The background is really soft, which helps make the flower come out from the background. The challenge for me for the image is the amount of information that actually is in focus. There's like a small section of the poppy that's in focus. I would have liked to seen a lot more of that in focus, including the stem that brings the poppy up to the top. The challenge was how much of the depth of field was in the image. The composition is fine. I would have flipped it so that you're leading in from the left, going up to the upper right, for me personally, because we read from left to right. Ebony Lace Wings Damselfly, 10 points. One of the challenges of this image are the eyes. They're a little bit out of focus. They're a little bit soft. I do like the overall design of the image where you have the wings creating a triangular shape inside the image itself. And in some ways, the background flowers, the leaves, sort of follow that same pattern, a sort of a diagonal pattern through the image. And then the diagonal line in the front flower, where you can see the vein actually creates a diagonal line too as well. And the shadow of the damselfly creates a diagonal line. This adds energy to the image and makes it work. The two drawbacks for me are the eyes are not quite sharp enough, and the flower in the background is too bright, so it competes with the damselfly. So I don't know if I'm supposed to look at the background or the foreground. If you could have brought down the brightness in the background and kept the foreground brighter, it would have scored more points. Rusted Ford Grill, 10 points. This has a nice tonal range for the overall capture. You can see all the rust, you can see the design, and it seems to be in sharp focus. The lighting overall is flat, so you don't have a lot of shape increased or enhanced by the lighting. The picture, because of the silver coming right through the middle, sort of divides it up into two different images. So I'm not sure if I'm supposed to look at the left side or the right side. I know what it is, and I know it's an abstract, and I know it's a truck like that, but I really have to have something that I want to see, and for me, rusty trucks aren't it. On a Cold Morning, 11 points. This is a nice capture of a horse's bridle and bit and the mouth of the horse. You're creating a nice triangular shape on the left-hand side with the snow in the background. You have all the hairs hanging down as sharp and in focus on the horse's mouth. The bridle is a nice added touch. One of the things that I might consider is the bridle is actually in the middle, dividing the picture in half from left to right. That may be a drawback. I also like to see the bottom of the bridle, so that bottom round piece, I would have liked to have seen that included in the shot. Make it more of a square photo. I like the way you did crop the horse, so you see his nose, his mouth, and all the snow stuff hanging off of him. I might have cleared up that little blurry piece of ice that's right next to the edge of his mouth. Overall, this is a nice capture of that horse. Stony, Texas Abandoned House, 11 points. This image is, I've seen things like this before. They're the classical faded paint, the rusty hinge. That captures that type of information very well. But my problem for me is, what is my actual subject? Am I looking at the hinge, or am I looking at the sort of wagon wheel? And I think maybe it's the overall design of the door here with the hinge and the ocean-bearing type of a design in the door itself. I think I might have preferred to see one or the other. The hinge is really close to the edge, and I don't really get to see all of the arch of the wagon wheel or the steering wheel for the ship. So I think I wanted a little bit more information to be in the photo, or a little bit less and focus on a hinge. HO gauge, 12 points. This is a nice, fun capture of a model train, and it's got the nice setup with the guy coming out of the building with the box and from the shipping department. And you have a nice diagonal line going through the photograph with the train track and the train itself. And then on the right-hand side, you have the ground. Creates a triangular shape, which triangular squares and circles are primary shapes, and when they're in your photograph, they can actually enhance your photo. But you have enough of the images in focus, and there's a lot of detail in the image. So overall, it's a nice capture of a setup that either you made or you found somewhere. Worthless, 12 points, honorable mention by Jose Arquiles. I like this photograph because of the sharpness of the coin and the three-dimensional feel of the image. You have the fingers in the foreground, you have the coin, you have the magnifying glass, and then you have the person in the back looking at the coin. I like that diagonal draw through the photograph. Is a really nice compositional touch. Once again, you have the circle, the coin circle, then you have the magnifying glass circle, then you have the eye circle, then you have the circle in the magnifying glass itself. So all those things sort of create that three-dimensional image and create a pleasant image. I would have preferred that the person that's looking at the coin actually be in focus as well. That can be hard going through a magnifying glass. I don't know how you could even do that, because it looks like actually makes it a little bit out of focus, because if you look at outside the magnifying glass, it looks more sharper. So the magnifying glass wasn't helping you there. Sherry, anyone? 13 points. This is a fun photograph. It has the glass piece, I guess the top of the bottle sitting on the floor there, and you can actually see the bottle's reflection in the glass itself in the top, which is really nice. So the top is really sharp and in focus, and then you have the bottle to give you a little bit of the story that's behind the image, and also give you the color foundation that's back there that's reflected in the top. And the thing I might have done on this image is maybe muted it a little bit on the background so it wasn't quite as bright and those bright spots in the glass. But other than that, I think it works pretty well. You have the composition of using the rule of thirds by putting the top and the rule of third intersection in the right forefront. That's really good. So that helps create a little bit of a depth in the image itself. Dining at the Milkweed Cafe, 14 points by Dennis Rich, and it's his third place. This is a very nice capture. It's very sharp and clear and in focus. The bees and the other little bug are all sharp and in focus. The background is well controlled, so there's no bright spots taking you out of the foreground into the background, and it's out of focus back there. My eye tends to go towards the middle of the plant instead of the bee, so I have to go find the bees. I'm not sure why that is, but I think it's the brightest spot of the image actually is in the middle of the photograph, so that draws me in first, and then I have to go out and explore. But that's fine, and that works for this photograph. And it is an appealing photograph to me. Green, 15 points, second place by Danette Volkmer. This is a nice centered photograph which creates the symmetry of centered. You don't have to have a leading line or anything like that to make this image work. It's the image itself is centered, so it's all the symmetry of that is what really works about this image. But at the same time, on the left-hand side, those when you since we read from left to right. Those little leaves bring you to the center and help or create leading lines to bring you there. The exposure is pretty cool. I mean, there are some spots where it's a little, maybe a little bright on the leaves, but I think it all works really well because it creates a sense of shape and design that's graphic. The color is pleasant too. The background versus the foreground is a nice color combination that helps bring out the plant. Traveling, 15 points. First place by John Lehman. It's also my favorite image out of the group. I like the way that you've designed the image going from left to right so that your subject is sort of in the upper right corner of the image, and you have the leading line of the plant bringing you up to that area. Compositionally, I like that. What really pushes it over the edge for me is the actual seed pods are actually sort of flying around in the air. They're not attached to the plant anymore, and you can see the detail in the actual seeds that are there floating in the air, and you have the feathery things from the actual seed pods. They're so feathery and they're so sharp and in focus, and they're sort of floating around, and that creates a really dynamic image in this case, and it really pops out off the image, all the detail and sharpness that is there, the composition of using the rule of thirds, and the circular sort of shape that you have when you circle around from the top all the way down to the right on the bottom, and then each pod itself creates a sense of a circle, a semicircle. So everything is working nicely in this image, and it's a great shot.